Okay, oh, it's starting? Okay. This is January 1st, 2019. My name is Jerry, and we're here in Evanston, Illinois at our house with some of our neighbors. And I'm going to be telling a story which I did at the Story Lab down in Chicago a couple weeks ago, but we didn't record it, and so now I'm going to be telling the story, so hopefully we can record it. This story is about the disappearance and almost certain murder of my grandfather, Victor Deissler, between the hours of 10 and 11:30 p.m. on the night of February 2nd, 1941. I think I was about 7 or 8 when my mother first explained that her father had disappeared 15 years earlier. She said there'd been a business deal gone bad. His car had been found 2 blocks from the railroad station in Youngstown, Ohio, which is about an hour's drive from Greenville, Pennsylvania, where the family had been living. She was 14 at the time. Though my grandmother, my mother's mother, was otherwise a very strong, outspoken person, I don't remember her ever saying a single word about this particular subject. I filled this vacuum with the supposition that my grandfather had either skipped town or committed suicide. Sometime in the 1990s, I talked with my cousin, Mary Deissler Marks, about this. She said that, though there was no concrete evidence, her father, Robert Deissler, my mother's brother, had thought that his father had been murdered. Since this was completely contrary to anything I'd ever heard previously, and since, though murder is certainly terrible, being murdered lacks the moral stigma that skipping town or committing suicide would have. Therefore, I dismissed this as kind of happy thing. You know, that when they were faced with these 3 kind of, different bad alternatives, that they were choosing the one which seemed the least objectionable from a moral standpoint, that is, being murdered as opposed to skipping town or committing suicide. That's where things stood until December 24th, 2008. I'd always thought of this as a very private matter of interest and concern only to our own family. But on December 24th, 2008, something, I don't know just what, prompted me to do a Google search on Victor Deissler. Among the very few results of that search was a 1941 Gettysburg Times newspaper article about my grandfather's disappearance. That article triggered intensive research by myself and my brother-in-law into what had actually happened. There were far more newspaper articles, police reports, etc., in existence than we had ever, in our wildest dreams, imagined possible. It seemed that my grandmother, wanting to shield her daughter and her grandchildren from the full horror and evil of the world, had not been telling the whole story, or that my mother had somehow misunderstood or had miscommunicated with us children, myself and my 4 siblings, as to what had really happened. And in any case, it was clear that we had been doing a terrible injustice to the memory of my grandfather. Unfortunately, my mother had died 10 months earlier in February 2008, so I never did get the chance to show her what we'd found or to talk with her about it. This is a timetable of events. 1926. My grandfather, who had a mechanical bent, starts building compressors for refrigerators and refrigeration equipment in Greenville, Pennsylvania. 1935. Mills Novelty Company, a Chicago-based mafia-connected manufacturer of slot and vending machines, invests $500,000, that's $8 million in 2018 dollars, in a plant to produce Coca-Cola vending machines. January 1941. Deissler Machine Company, which had been formed in the 1930s and had grown exhibits a Westinghouse Coca-Cola vending machine with a Deissler compressor in it at the All Industry Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Exhibition, that's really a mouthful, in Chicago, Mills Novelty Company's home turf. And just to make sure you have things straight, Deissler Machine Company was the company that my grandfather had formed, and Mills Novelty Company was a competitor to Deissler Machine Company in the manufacture and sale of Coca-Cola vending machines, among other things. So this is a photograph of my grandfather from around that time. So you can see that. And this is an actual photograph, I can't believe this exists, of the Deissler exhibit at this 1941 Chicago Refrigeration Exhibition. And this is my grandfather standing over here, and this is seated to his left is my great-grandfather, Frank Deissler, his father, who was part of the company, but certainly it was my grandfather, Victor, who was the driving force behind the whole thing. And on the far left here, you can see the actual Coca-Cola vending machine with the Deissler compressor in it. And then this is a close-up of that machine. And as you can see, the bottom part is removed so people can see, potential customers can see the Deissler compressor better. And these photographs will be available online at the website so you can see them better if this, you can't really see it here. So back to the chronology. 8:30 p.m. Sunday, February 2nd, 1941, 2 weeks after returning from this Chicago Refrigeration Exhibition. I want you to note that this is just 2 weeks. My grandfather goes to the company office to place $600, that's $9,018 in cash in the company safe. Per my grandmother in a later newspaper report, he was wearing a green pinstripe suit. 10 p.m. He calls my grandmother to say he'll be home shortly. She retires for the night. 11:30 p.m. A man wearing a tan or light brown overcoat is seen parking a car. Oh, he had a brown hat on too. Is seen parking a car later identified as my grandfather's car in the parking lot at 728 Mahoning Avenue in Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown is about an hour's drive from Greenville, Pennsylvania, where the Deissler plant was located, and is seen walking up Mahoning Avenue. 6:30 the next morning, my grandmother awakens to find her husband not home. She calls her father-in-law, Frank Deissler, my great-grandfather, who goes to the company plant and finds the office ransacked. Blood on the door, blood on the office desk, blood on the packing crate, the office safe open, the $600 gone, no sign of his son, my grandfather, Victor himself. Greenville police investigate. They find footprints in the snow outside the office window, indicating that someone had been peering in. They note that my grandfather's overcoat is hanging in the office. Youngstown police examine the car. They find blood on the steering wheel, a green pinstripe suit with a torn sleeve, other clothing, my grandfather's wallet, and a black briefcase. They note specifically that there are several pamphlets from Mills Novelty Company Chicago on the floor of the car. Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI are called in to assist in the investigation. It becomes a national story. Newspapers from Racine, Wisconsin to San Antonio, Texas report on it. But law enforcement fails. A week later, they report, we are now at a stalemate. The case goes cold. Lost without its charismatic leader and chief engineer, the Deissler Machine Company goes bankrupt within 3 years. February 8th, 1950. 9 years after his disappearance, my grandfather was declared legally dead. There are three main hypotheses as to what happened. The first is the absconding hypothesis. This posits that my grandfather staged a robbery abduction, drove his car to Youngstown, leaving it in the parking lot 2 blocks from the railroad station, and skipped town with $600 and whatever else he might have taken from the office safe. But why would he do this? There's zero evidence that he wasn't getting along with his wife and family. One might hypothesize serious problems with the business, but the business was going great. If he had wanted to steal money from the company, he could have easily taken much more than $600 simply by withdrawing it from the company bank account. No to the absconding hypothesis. The second hypothesis is suicide. This depends on all the same conditions as the absconding, but doesn't require that my grandfather be a complete scoundrel, just very depressed. There is a problem with the money. Why would someone who's going to be committing suicide take $600, that's $9,000 in 2018 with him? And the car in Youngstown, you might say he drove there to jump off the bridge over the Mahoning River, but the observers on Sunday night had seen the driver of the car walking up Mahoning Avenue, away from the river. And then there's the blood and the disarray in the office. That would require the same fake robbery abduction as the absconding scenario, but makes zero sense, absolutely no sense whatsoever in the case of a suicide. Why would he bother? No to the suicide hypothesis. Last but not least, murder. The murder hypothesis is by far the most consistent with the facts. It doesn't require any convoluted fake robbery abduction. It doesn't require my grandfather to be abandoning the family who loved him or the 30-person company who depended on him so completely. The only problem is the car. Why would the murderer have driven the car to Youngstown and left it in the parking lot with the keys in it? The car was an almost new Cadillac, was quite valuable, worth say at least $20,000 in 2018 dollars. But it may be that the $600 in the car were relative sidelights in this whole business. It may be that the real stakes were much higher, such as the need to protect Mills Novelty Company's $500,000, that's $8 million in 2018 dollars investment from a serious competitor. Leaving the car in Youngstown may have just been a coincidence, but if calculated, it shows a truly diabolical level of genius. I suggest there were 2 main reasons this investigation was stillborn within a week. 1, no body, and 2, the supposed victim's car being found 2 blocks from the railroad station. Though no body was ever found and no one was ever convicted or even accused of this crime, it bears all the trademarks of a mafia hit. The mafia were professionals at making people disappear. Youngstown was known throughout the 1940s and 50s throughout the country as, largely because of these mafia killings, as Murder Town, USA. I'm really, really pissed at the cowardice and ineptness of the police and the FBI in failing to follow up on these obvious mafia connections. Despite the fact that the police report had noted multiple Mills Novelty Company pamphlets on the floor of the car, it's not clear that the police or FBI ever took the time to understand that Mills Novelty Company was a manufacturer of Coca-Cola vending machines and the Deissler Machine Company was a direct and serious competitor in this growing business. And that Mills had well-documented connections with the mafia. Or it may be that they did understand, but were just too afraid to do anything about it. It may be that the mafia had paid off the Youngstown police, at least. The mafia was really powerful back in those days. It may be that they just didn't want to mess with the mafia. I like to think that if I had been there in 1941, I would have been hounding, absolutely hounding the police and the FBI, screaming bloody murder all the way to jail if necessary, until they or I found out who had killed my grandfather. But that's not going to happen now. Too many years have passed. Someone who was 20 years old in 1941 would have been 87 in 2008 when my brother-in-law and I first uncovered these facts. My heart cries out for justice, for my mother, for her brother, my Uncle Bob, for my grandmother and for my grandfather, who never got the chance to see or know a single one of the 9 grandchildren born to his son and daughter and their spouses in the years following his murder. But there will be no justice done in this case, not ever. One final note. though my mother had died earlier in 2018, my Uncle Bob was still alive at the time that my brother-in-law and I had done this research. And my cousin Mary did talk with him about what we found. As you may remember, he had felt right along that his father had been murdered. He just didn't understand who could have done it or why. But so she told him about the Coca-Cola vending machines, the Mills Novelty Company, and he said, yes, that makes sense. Finally, there's something in this business that makes sense. So that was sort of a vindication of that we had done something right. So anyway, that's it. So you can stop it.
Questions?
Oh no, we'll do that. No. Okay, so I'll pass out these.